Okay, thank you very much, Tom. That was very good. Um, so again, I'll ask people to raise their hand if they have questions. Um, Although I do notice that we have one question. Well, let me start by asking the first question. And that's with the proviso that you mentioned that the costs would be very different depending on layouts and numbers and all of this. What was the installation cost per stall in round figures of
well, in round figures, including the 13 chargers and infrastructure for everyone, it was around, and I'm rounding us off, around $100,000.
Right, 100,000 for 42 infrastructure for 42, plus the actual 13 was included in that. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
So I'm just trying to do some quick math. It's just a little over $2,000 per stall. 2,000 times 42 would be. Am I right?
4,000.
Yeah. It'd be a little higher, but if you take off the chargers, it would be in that crude neighborhood. Yeah, again, the reason I sort of steered away from spending too much time on the total amount is it's, to be blunt, irrelevant to everyone else. Your building is going to be different. Your ability, and even if your building were the same as our building, your circumstances, your funding, your reserve funds may be different than ours, or the will of your owners may be very different than ours. Maybe you're in a building where they'd pay almost anything to get it, or maybe they would pay nothing to get it.
Yeah. I must say I was impressed, though, that you were able to ask for a special levy of under $1,000 per person with all the other funding. So that's very reasonable. Yeah.
Yes, we had mentioned at one point the balance between the special levy and using CRF funds. And that is one that every building is going to have to grapple with. And I think it's a key one, because we sort of felt that if you were into 4 digits for a special levy, it becomes a little more of a meaningful thing. And yet it was well under $1,000. And we thought, for properties that probably average $1 million or not far off anyway, that's going to seem like such a small amount that people can not focus necessarily on the dollars, but on the other attributes they're being asked to judge.
Yeah, very good. I know I paid a lot more than that to put my charger in my house, so that's a very good deal for everybody involved. So I have I see Simon, you're raising your hand there manually, which is fine. Why don't you go ahead and ask your question?
Okay, thanks. I just wasn't clear what you said about requiring a 75% majority. I think you said at one point, you said the legal counsel advised that you didn't, but then from the slide it looked like you did. So that's the barrier that a lot of stratas are going to come up against, is that, as I said, we got 74% and it failed. So I'm just curious what you actually needed the 75% majority
for. Sure. But the charts that I showed, there were 2 references to 75%. The first reference was that at our special meeting, 75% of the owners showed up, which is, I think, a really, really good turnout. And everyone voted yes. The other reference I made had to do with whether or not the Strata Council deems the installation of charging to be a significant change to common property. So if the council says, yes, we think this is a significant change, then they must get 75% approval under the Act. Yeah. But council, which is what our council did, council said, no, this is not a significant change. We do not have to ask the people for permission to do this and get that 75% threshold. I could see maybe in some buildings, depending what you did, maybe the installation of electrical equipment would be such that a council might say, this is a pretty significant change or some such thing. But we felt it is not significant.
Right. I mean, our situation is, the road we're going down is almost identical to yours. in terms of the setup. I'm just wondering why, in some circumstances, it would be deemed, a change, and sometimes it wouldn't. And if there's any legal precedent that we could quote to say to Strata Council, we don't need to get a 75% majority here. Look, this condo went ahead and did it, and fine, without having to need 75%. Why are you asking for 75% vote?
Sure. Well, I can imagine, and I have to make up a circumstance, but I can imagine one. Suppose you needed a big new transformer and had to go outside the building on your boulevard.
Yeah, no, it's not. We're just using the.
I know, but it may not be your particular case.
Okay.
I don't know your case, but I can understand there could be an occasion where someone would say this passes the test for being a significant change. Our lawyer did send us a couple of judgments, and I think they're actually on the CHOA site, the condominium homeowner. So you can look there, because they have actually printed a couple of the legal decisions regarding the definition or what factors are used in deciding whether or not it's a significant change, to assist councils in making that decision.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay. I have a couple of hands up and a couple of questions. Excuse me, a couple of questions in the chat. So we'll do the 2 hands up, and then I'll go to the questions in the chat, and I'll encourage people to raise their hands if they want to ask a question. So the next up, I have Larry Bolt. Do you want to ask your question?
There we go. That's got my unmute done. Thanks, Tom. That's been excellent. Great information. I mentioned at the start that I joined the council because for 2 years now I've been trying to get my way to charge my car, and they actually, when I first applied, they put in a rule, not a bylaw, but it was ratified by 75%, that no electric cars can plug into the existing 110s. So they really were anti EV. However, I've kind of swayed by joining council. I've been able to give them a lot more facts, and we've now got our EV ready plan. We've just had that completed for us. And you're absolutely right what you said about the differences. In our case, we are 4 buildings, 229 homeowners, with 319 parking stalls. So our EV ready plan is, before rebates, $425,000. So we've got a big mountain to climb here. Wow. To get that by our people. Taking off 80,000 brings it to 365, because we would qualify for the maximum rebate. We'd have to apply, of course, but our electrical contractor who did this is close friends with somebody in the government, and with the next budget, apparently it's jumping to 120. So we're going to have a little extra for ourselves that way to help sell it. My understanding is one of the simplest ways is to sell it on the property value, that your property is going to be increasing in value. And so some of the questions I had, it looks like from your chart that you showed there, you had your, before you had your special general meeting, you applied for your rebates and got those approved first. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, good. And what do you charge for your connection fee? We haven't even considered something like that.
Oh, well, we charge a little over $2,000 for the charger and the connection fee.
So
for
$200?
Don't distinguish in the amount, really. If you want a charger, it's a little over $2,000 for the charger and the connection fee.
Okay, so if somebody purchases the charger themselves, what would their connection fee be separately?
It'd be around $500.
About 500. Okay, good. That gives us
that may
something.
change. That may change, Larry, over time, but that's what it is at the moment.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. If I give you my email, could you send me your PowerPoint if I put it into the chat for you?
I'll think about that. Send me your email.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Just, I'm trying to gather as much information as I can just to, I spoke with a fellow who's on this meeting tonight from Victoria, And Summers in Parksville, I spoke to him last week, his condo, they've just got theirs under construction. And another thing that we are doing here with Mid-Island Electric Vehicle Association, we are meeting with our MLA on the 13th. And one of our questions is that they are working on, we've heard that they're working on what's called the right to charge for multi-unit residential buildings that are existing already. A lot of municipalities have, okay, you're building a new building. Part of it is you have to put so much EV infrastructure in when you're building that, but older buildings such as ours, and ours are the youngest, were built in about 2010. Building I'm in was 1999, so we are older, but we have sufficient electricity, so we don't have to put anything extra in. So I've learned a lot tonight. I really appreciate this, Tom. I know there's other people. I see my friend John on there with his hand up, so I'm going to pass it off. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Larry. Next, we'll go to, I'm sorry, I've got you listed as Zoom user. So if you're a Zoom user with your hand up, you're on to ask a question.
This is Jacques.
Okay, hi, Jacques. Okay, good. Take it away. Ask your question.
Thank you. And also, I also want to thank Tom for a very interesting presentation. We've been in the same kind of fight for years for our condo. My question for you is, how did you, first of all, did you have initially a lot of pushback from owners to this idea? And if so, how did you manage to change the mindset so that you eventually got 100% voting in favor?
We didn't have to kidnap anyone, so that was good. I think really when I talked about the differences from building to building and the different mix of owners you get, it probably is one of those near random things where the mixture of people who live in our building just happen to be a lot of people who support EV charging. We didn't have pushback against the idea. We had people who asked questions, but there was no campaign to vote no. No one stood up and said, this is a terrible idea. We shouldn't vote for this. Everyone that we spoke to, and again, this is a fairly small building, so it's relatively easy to get a hold of most people. You see them in the hallways and the elevators. We just didn't get much pushback from the very start. One of the things that we did, we started sending out newsletters early, before we'd even decided that we should go ahead and consider putting in infrastructure. We had sent out 2 newsletters saying, okay, here are some of the options, here are what some of the rebates might be, here are the kinds of plans, what do you think about this? Let us know. So by the time we had made the decision to go ahead, we had, I think, given people a pretty good opportunity to learn whatever answers they needed to make a decision. And they so strongly voted yes. It was really surprising, but I'm grateful.
Would you be willing to share those newsletters?
I would edit them, of course. Yes, I would take out numbers we use because they're just there's just so much focus on the numbers, and as I say, it shouldn't help you. What we paid shouldn't matter to you.
I'm not interested in the numbers, Tom. I'm more interested in how you approach the owners, what kind of language you used, because that's so important.
All right. I'm not sure how to get them to you, but I can get them to you.
Yeah, Ron has my my email because I'm on.
Okay.
I'm on Viva.
All right.
Okay, that's excellent discussion. I just am reflecting that the current climate, for people who've had a bad pushback before, the current climate with the oil crisis and the war that we're going on right now, it's very patriotic to not be consuming oil. And the climate might be better to raise the question now than it was maybe a year ago. With that, I'll ask 2 quick questions from the chat. One is very simple. How many owners have EVs in your unit? I think you said this was at 6.
There are six EVs and hybrids. I think we have 3 of each. I think we have 3 Teslas and 3 newer, I guess BMW or something. But yeah, 3 of each.
Hybrids. Yeah. Okay. Very good. And Donovan has asked, and Donovan, you can jump in if you need any clarification here. are there any renter residents in the building? I know this can be a problem sometimes in condos. Do you have any renter residents in yours? And if
Yes.
so, what proportion of residents are tenants versus owners?
I think about a third of our 42 would be renters. They're not all renters that can be advertised because they may be original owners. We do have a limit of 4 rental units, but they're under the Act. There are exemptions from that. So when we add in the exemptions, I think we have 12 or 13. One of those renters, in fact, has a Tesla, and that renter's owner wanted a charger for them. I don't know what arrangement they made, but so we have not had an issue with tenants and EV charging in any way.
So you didn't have to do, it wasn't more difficult to get this through rental suites than the others?
Well, the only people entitled to vote are owners.
Yes. Okay, so I have a number of questions lined up, and I'll take them in the order that the hands went up. John Stonier, you next. Have we lost John?
You're muted, John, if you can unmute.
Pass.
Okay, very good.
Can you hear?
That was easy. Stuart Forsyth.
I think maybe your microphone's not plugged in or something like that, John, because you're talking and unmuted, but it's not coming through. I just was wondering what your Tom, what your strata management company is.
Which company?
Yeah, which company are you guys using? Is that
Korecki.
sometimes? What's that?
A company called Korecki, K-O-R-E-C-K-I, Korecki Real Estate. See, they were really good about arranging that special general meeting because we had a terribly tight timeline due to the 3-month window for the rebates.
Right.
Okay.
Okay. Next up is, if that's all you have, is Jim. Go ahead, Jim.
Thanks. That's a fantastic presentation, Tom. I really appreciated that.
Thank you.
I wondered if you could expand a little bit on the 6-hour power interruption to cut in your system. We're getting close to that in a few weeks, and you mentioned something about special security arrangements. What did you encounter?
Yeah. See, it went remarkably smoothly. We have an elevator, 2 elevators here. So we were a bit concerned that it may be a bit of a hike for people who happen to choose that day to buy 10 gallons of the drinking water. We, our property manager arranged with a security company to have 2 people staff the building during the 6 hours. One was to check cars coming into the garage, because remember the gate doesn't work, so I had to leave it open. And the other just constantly patrolled all of the hallways and stairwells. And that's because the fire alarm systems are off. So that took care of sort of the security end. As it turned out, our battery for the fob system at the front door lasted 6 hours. So we didn't actually have to check people's ID as they came in the front door, but we did down at the parking garage. In terms of lighting the stairwells, we found a really, really nifty solution. You can buy these LED camping lights. They're about the size of a large tin of beans or tomatoes. And they have 3 LEDs in them, and they last about 20 hours. And they cost about $7 each, $7 or $8 each. You get them in packs of 4 online. So we bought 28 of those campfire LEDs and hung them in all the stairwells and the hallways because they would be pitch black otherwise. Obviously, our emergency lighting would work, but it wouldn't work necessarily for 6 hours. So those lights made a big difference. Other than that, it went pretty smoothly.
Just one short follow-up, and that is, did you no doubt had to notify the fire department. Did they have any comment about it or any
No, we
involvement?
notified the fire department, we notified police.
Yeah.
But of course, the main one we had to notify, and our contractor did that, was the security alarm monitoring company. But yes, we did tell the protective services when it would be out. To be honest, they didn't care that much. The fire department didn't care that much. They said, no, look, the monitoring of that alarm is up to your private company. If there's a problem, they'll get a hold of us right away. But I thought we should at least let them know.
Okay, thanks, Tom.
Okay, next up, and is room, this is the last question. We have one other question in the chat that I'll get to, but the last question online. So if you think of questions, you should have room to get in here. The next up, we have Harvey, and I see Don's just put his hand up, so I'll get to you next, Don. Go ahead, Harvey.
Well, Tom, first of all, I want to say you've done an amazing job in coordinating this whole thing. Your Strata Council, that is. I've had a lot of frustrations in my Strata Council here in Whistler. I was actually talking to a good friend of mine. Well, I do have some questions before I get started with something else, but the questions I have are, what was your condo, when was your condo building built? What year?
2005.
Okay, so it's, in the big scheme of things, it's relatively recent. And did you have enough, and the question number 2 is, did you have enough dedicated power for each of your 42 stalls? Dedicated power.
After the installation of the new subsurface, yes. The building had enough power for the new service. So
Okay.
we didn't have
So in
to
other
pump
words,
up power.
So in other words, not that you would ever need this, but if down the road that you had 42 chargers with 42 cars all charging at all the same time, your building would be able to handle that?
Yes.
Okay. Because there's a lot of buildings that are built older than that, and they simply don't have the power to do what your electrician has done. I know in our Whistler condo, we have over 200 stalls, 138 of them are for owners, others are for visitors. And we have to spend $1 million to upgrade our electrical system, not just for electrical vehicle chargers, but also a lot of people want air conditioning units. And that's another big, drain. We could probably put in, 5 chargers, maybe 10 without having to upgrade the electrical system. But if you're going to do it, you want to do it fully like you have done. And I think I take my hat off to what you've done. But we have a big hurdle to do because our system was put in 1996 and 97 when the buildings was made. And we, they didn't have there was no talk of EVs at that time, as most condos being built were there. Now, I believe that any new condo building that is being made has to have the infrastructure for every single parking spot in Vancouver Lower Mainland, if I'm not mistaken. Even if a building doesn't have the capability of charging every single car all at the same time, it's not necessary to be able to have that power, because there are smart chargers that will manage the power, and if it's not available, it will not charge. Only when extra power is available, it will charge. Okay. Now this is one thing that I was quite surprised about, and this is more, those are the questions I have for you, but have you ever heard of a company called Electric Asset Inc?
No.
Okay. They put in, this is more of like what you've done is amazing. And what this company does is takes all the headache out of what you've done for Strata units. And they have a model where the Strata doesn't have to pay anything.
I know of this. They're not the only company doing it.
Yeah.
Right. Anyway, I had a friend of mine who lives up at Whistler, and he has a condo in Vancouver on Seymour Street. There's 400 suites. It's on Seymour between Georgia and Robson. All right. And it's a new, relatively new building. I think it was built in 2008. And they have 400 parking spots. Not every unit, I think it's 200 spots, but not every unit has a parking spot being straight downtown. Anyway, a friend of mine who I went to dinner with 2 days ago or last week, I was surprised he's the president of his strata of this Strata Corporation for that building, and they have agreed to put in chargers in for who everybody wants it. The cost to the strata will be zero. Each individual owner, whoever wants it, can either get it electrified for getting a charger later, or getting it electrified now and get a charger later. And the way the system works is that I think he said his cost was $5,000 one-time fee to get his stall charged. And then there's a $13 a month collection fee. And then he gets billed directly from the company that put it in. A monthly goes on his credit card automatically, and it's monitored and everything. And I thought that this company was amazing what they were able to do. One of the questions that I'd like to answer that the Electric Asset has put out for Stratas for the questions that will help owners. Like, what did you say? So this one was really good. I'm just going to read it. It says, maintain your real estate value. In an ever-increasing world of rapid technology changes, real estate is not immune to such changes. Real estate is one of the single investments that we all make in our lifetime, and the appreciation in value is what drives our net worth. Do not let this asset class value suffer by not adopting to technology changes. Trends in real estate suggest that buildings that do not have EV charge stations at each parking stall will suffer a drop in value. Buyers now have EV charger as a top 5 requirement and will buy into a building that has the convenience of a charging at each parking stall. So I think that's a pretty damn good reason for strata owners to consider seriously that even though you may not own an electric vehicle now, you may in 5 years or whenever you plan to get one, or next year or whatever. But I think it's a really strong argument, especially when all the legacy automakers currently are given dates when they're going to stop producing ICE vehicles.
Okay, Harvey, I'm going to cut you off there. Thank you for that. I know this is a kind of a controversial topic, and I'll just say that you're probably going to increase your value more by putting in your own electricity as opposed to having your building tied to a monthly cost, because these guys are going to take quite a bit of profit off of you down the road. So, but it's a complicated issue, and I think it's a little off topic. So, I'm glad you introduced it. I don't know if Tom wants to respond to that before we get on. We do have some other people lined up for questions.
I'll respond quickly. We decided that we wouldn't use a third-party billing company, but we can. The company who makes the chargers that we have installed will bill you for your electricity if you want. We just thought, look, let's keep this really simple. For one thing, they keep a portion of the money, so you actually have to pay more for the electricity than you would if we billed you. So we thought, we'll just make it simple. If you use $20 worth of electricity, you pay $20. You don't pay 24 with some money going to a third party. And I totally agree on the issue of future property values. And I think that's one of the reasons that we got 100% of the people voting yes, is they clearly believe that this is a net asset, that this is worth the small amount of money being asked of them, because we know only 3 of them have EVs and 3 of them have hybrids. The rest of them must have voted yes because they believed that this would be something to help their property values.
Okay, thanks. Next up is Don Chandler. Go ahead, Don. I think you might be muted there. Yeah, Don, you have to unmute.
Sorry, I hit it twice.
Good.
The question I have, you talked about in your design plan that you had chosen to share power and you chose to share 3 stalls together. How did you come at that decision? What kind of recommendations did you
Sure.
have? I'm kind of interested in what advice you got about
Okay.
what would be optimal, because the more you share, of course, the lower the cost.
Yeah, it's a bit of a trade-off because the more you share, the lower the cost, but also you don't get quite as fast charging if multiple people are using it. Our contractor, a company called Seagull Electric, who we were really happy with, in the early planning stages, gave us estimates and description of different sharing options. So 1-to-1, so that everyone had their own dedicated circuit right back to the box. 2-to-1, where 2 people would share a junction box. 3-to-1, 4-to-1. A couple of the contractors suggested we could get by with 5-to-1 because not many people have EVs. And we felt that that was a medium viewpoint. The longer viewpoint is, you know, if more and more and more people have them, 5-to-1 is maybe a little too sparse. So we chose 3-to-1 for no sound scientific reason other than it cost a little less than 2-to-1 and it was better than 4-to-1. The amount of charging that we'll get from 3-to-1 is still pretty good. And you know, it might be 10 years, it might be 20 years before you actually had a circuit in which all 3 people are charging at the same time. So it wasn't so much a scientific decision or a political one. It was really one just to balance off what we thought was the value of the EV charging plan against the cost.
Good, thanks a lot. I might comment that it would be possible at the University of BC area, if you were to share 9 or 10-to-1, you would still have everybody charged overnight, given the average distances traveled in that area. It's one of the areas I've done the scientific work on. The challenge today is finding the charging systems that are commercially ready. We know here at Viva, Kelly at BCIT has developed a system which will do it, as is Mike Schuler at Variable Grid, but there's not a lot of others out there. And so you're kind of in the early ages of the technology to be able to do that much. But your costs would have gone down by about 50% per stall if you had done the more charging. And if the other comment on the change in appearance, I did quite a bit of research into that at one point and found the 2 references to legal cases that were there and the test cases of about 7 tests they used, found about a dozen other tests that could be used. That can make a very strong argument that there is no significant change in appearance or use. It's still a utilitarian appearance in a parking lot, use primarily parking, et cetera. So that's not an obstacle in general. If anybody has need to do it, get a hold of me and I can give you a long 5-pager on all the different arguments. Thanks,
Don, I will add one thing, well, not just for Don, but for everyone. We have a twin building about a block away, and they beat us. They actually finished their EV installation about a week or so before we did ours. They chose different sharing than we chose. So there would be a good example of how 2 buildings that would be looking at probably the same physical attributes have a different makeup by owners or a different set of preferences and priorities about what they would pay and how they would pay it and how they would charge. So we weren't the first, and I think they might have even gone 1-to-1, but with different kinds of chargers. Anyway, we chose the 3-to-1 just because it seemed like pretty good middle ground between cost and efficiency.
And
Yeah,
Tom,
usually it's the most you can share on a 40 amp circuit for the area. 4Share is pretty easy in terms of finding the technology, for sure. So it's, I was curious how your approach was, because I helped BC Hydro define for the program the performance requirements needed in various cities and areas. And they're not really monitoring it very carefully. They don't have a lot of feedback. People aren't familiar with how to calculate it. So it's an educational stage that will reduce costs over time as the technology emerges.
Yeah, if I can just follow up with a question about how exactly does the sharing 3-to-1 work? If 3 people plug in at once, does it share equally to the three? Does it monitor how much charge people have? Does it give 20 seconds to one person, then 20 seconds to the next? Or does it give everybody a third of the power so they're more trickle charging?
It gives everyone a third of the power.
Right.
It's better than trickle charging by far.
Right.
It's a third of the power.
Right. Yeah, and you have a 40 amp and each one is only drawing 30, so it's a bit more than a third you would have available probably, right? But yes, okay, good. The next question comes from John Stonier. Are you hooked up?
Is my
John?
microphone working? Good. I had to reboot.
Okay.
A couple points on the 75% vote requirement. Our condo, I think, is doing this because it's an allocation from the contingency fund. So because of that, it's a supermajority vote required. Comment on the 3-for-1 share in our building in the city of Vancouver. I think there was reference in our quotation that the city of Vancouver has a bylaw that requires a minimum of 12 kilowatts over nighttime, over the charging period. And that is what drove the 3-to-1 for our building. But I'd like to just talk about our building because we are the latest condo to approve EV infrastructure. And basically it started out badly. I had been obviously recommending it to the condo board for some time and supporting them on it, giving them some talks. But what happened was when the AGM was called in early March, the description of the project was horrid. It was not even true. It was bad because they picked up on the wrong thing. They figured out we are a building of 165 suites, which was going to be 55 40 amp circuits shared 3-for-1, but it was never worded that way. It was like 55 circuits, so what are we buying? And so of course it was like, what? This doesn't make any sense at all. So the first thing we had to do is get around this bad description. And this was a property manager, doesn't know anything about EV charging, wrote, and the council didn't have the wherewithal to change it in the draft of the agenda. So basically we sort of got back together again. We had a pre-AGM meeting on the Friday night before the AGM, and we had a good number of council or condo owners come in and attend. And I spoke to the whole thing, and everybody said, "Hey, this is great, John. Can you be at the AGM? Can you talk to at the AGM?" So for the AGM, I put together a presentation, and I really was favoring. I wasn't hashing through all the stuff that most people talk about. I was concentrating on a couple things. First of all, the nature of the grants. The grants are designed to have a complete plan in place, like Tom carefully considered. You do the entire building at once. It's the most economical way to do it. You build for the future, and that's your plan that gets approved by EV Ready. And EV Ready is designed that way on purpose. The next thing, so the EV infrastructure grant, which is $80,000, that's the big chunk of money that somebody said maybe going to 120. If it is, that's terrific. But it's capped out at $600 per stall. And when we talk about stalls, we're talking per junction box, right? Because what happened in our building, we have 277 spots for 165, and basically one junction box is planned for every suite. So every suite will have a junction box. You may have to share it between 2 or 3 cars, as the case may be. But that's completely doable. So the other thing I focused on was the new low carbon fuel standard. And I put together a presentation, and that morning I actually said, okay, I'm going to figure out exactly what the benefit is. What is a scenario of the low carbon fuel standard, carbon credit? And I was expecting it to be pretty good after the knowledge we gained from Michael Rensing, who spoke on the Viva webinar January 18th. So I used my accounting knowledge and forecast and put it together. And so here's what I assumed. I assumed that our cars are driving 15,000 kilometers a year. Average car, 16 kilowatt hours per 100K. And we were going to charge 15,000 kilometers a year from inside the building. So that all that electricity goes into the carbon credit pool. It works out to about $1,000 a car. And so I assumed, you know, we're starting with 8 cars in our building. I assume we're going to add 5 in the next year, and we're only going to be able to charge for half the year by the time our, you know, if that's the case. Maybe it's a bit longer than that from that timeline that you said, Tom. And then add 10 cars a year going forward. 10 cars a year. And basically, under those scenarios, I calculated an internal rate of return, net of the EV infrastructure grant, of 13% and a break even by 2030, 7 years. And after that period of time, there is positive cash flow. And I, you know, with 10 cars a year from where we're starting, that's like 100 cars in the parkade by 2030, which is completely, I think, realistic, because nobody's buying a gas car if they can buy an electric at this point in time. That's just sort of a given. So, you know, after that, you're talking, if the transfer prices stay the same, that is like $100,000 a year coming into the coffers just from the carbon credits. It is phenomenal. So when I talked to everybody in our AGM on last Thursday night, in the room, we had, I think, about 45 people. There were some unknown proxies that the property manager had not included in the votes. And he said, look, we'll take the votes and we'll look at them tomorrow and I'll give you the final count. So in the room, we got a 93% approval. After the proxies were added up, we got 85. So we were on our way down to 75, but we made it. And one of the interesting things I noted was there was a number of proxies who abstained. And when you abstain, you take your vote out of the denominator, so that the entire pool gets. So if you have people that are, here's a strategy. If you have people that are not sure what to do, tell them to abstain, and that will reduce the full total amount of the count. So bottom line, the low carbon fuel standard is really an important piece of this. And it's so early that most people don't know. I was standing around the lobby the next morning because I was waiting for a CBC reporter to interview me on this. And people were saying, John, thank you so much. This is great. You really, you know, helped us out. So I'm actually thinking about becoming a consultant on this, but it really is a very important piece. And if you crunch the numbers, you're probably going to get a payback period of, let's say, you know, 5 to 10 years, but the money will come back from out of your contingency fund. And after that, it's gravy. It's like every year in our condo, we're swallowing the pill of how much extra cash we're going to put in the contingency fund. And if the EV charging can do that extra cash in the future, it's going to be pretty sweet.
Very good. Tom, do you want to respond to that part of it?
No, well, a minor comment. We came across the gain from the whole carbon program after we had actually done the work. So it was really a bonus to discover that, in fact, there's an opportunity there for ongoing cash flow. My personal belief is that that cash flow will dry up. Is that as more and more of this takes money out of some other program, some government is going to cut it back in some fashion. But even if they cut it by 50%, it's still a bonus. So I agree with John. Is that the future is getting laid down pretty clearly in front of us on this. And this is an added benefit that we would have told our owners about if we'd known at the time we were consulting them.
Okay, good. I have a few more hands up, but before we get to Ed, Lawrence, and Stuart, I'm going to ask a couple of questions from the chat. So I hope somebody can answer this very quickly. I don't want to get too far into the right to charge, but Simon, who mentioned right to charge earlier, is just asking, Has anyone got an update on the BC government right to charge initiative and any timelines? John, do you want to answer that in a minute or two?
Sorry.
Right to charge. Can you just say a brief?
Yeah, I'm not an expert on that, but my personal opinion is that is a hard, politically hard piece of legislation, because that is what Tom referred to earlier, is somebody's going to tell you to do something. And politically, that's a harder sale. But they are, you know, in BC, we've got the greatest incentives in the world. Nobody has an EV infrastructure program as generous as British Columbia, and nobody, not even California, is doing the low carbon fuel standard for, well, they are actually for EV charging. I believe that started because some California companies are now coming up to BC looking to cash in on that whole thing and do that sort of servicing. So we have already some really terrific financial incentives.
I'll just say about right to charge, my understanding about right to charge is it just means if you're in a condo and there's a little plug there and you say, I want to charge my car, the right to charge legislation would say the condo can't unreasonably tell you you can't, that they have to try and accommodate electric car owners. And how exactly that will look, I don't know. Yes, Simon, go ahead.
Well, it was in the BC government's statement last year about what they were going to do to mitigate climate change. And there was a line about exactly the situation that we're in, where there's like a vast majority of owners want to install EV infrastructure, but not 75%. And it was the right of condo owners to, I think they'd reduce that percentage. I think that was the implication. So it's not to do with physical, you know, it's to do with strata governance.
If I can add as well on that point, my understanding is that there will be at some point a right to charge as long as you do it in accordance with whatever bylaws are put into place by your condo. So if you already have an electrical plan that says this is the type of charger and connection that you're going to need, your right to charge will be accommodated as long as you do it according to the condo's plan.
We, on the right to charge in our building, like I said, 280 stalls altogether on two parking floors. As it turns out, we have 5 cars in the general parkade, and right now they are limited to 1 per floor. If they more than 2 plug into the 110 outlets, which are designed for vacuum cleaners, they blow the fuse. So they basically have worked out a schedule. And we put in a bylaw. I put in a bylaw when we first reviewed our bylaws in 2009. I was on council, and I slipped in a clause to make sure that if you wanted to plug into 110, you could, but you pay $30 a month just for a flat building, easy administration, so there isn't any, you know, snapping back and forth about who's using electricity. That's what we did. So that facilitated it. And all you have to do is register with the bylaw. Basically says register with the caretaker, and they make sure that there's no tripping hazard from the cables, and then you're good to go. $30 a month, you can do it. If that is your starting point, that's where you might want to start with your strata.
Okay, thanks. I don't want to spend too much time on that. It's a bit of a side issue. So I'm going to ask the next question in the chat that comes from Donovan Whistler. I'm not sure if doesn't have a live hookup or something, but he's asking questions in the chat. This seems like a good one, so I'm going to read it out. This is for you, Tom. It's specifically about your building. Regarding the building electrical system, how future-proof is it in terms of installing electric kitchen ranges and air conditioning, etc.? That is, was the building supplied originally with natural gas ranges? And if so, were 208 volt electrical receptacles in place at the time of building for switching to electrical ranges? Also, were air conditioning units installed in the condo at the time of the build? If not, what is involved to install them as retrofits? So the rationale behind the question is simply, can the electrical system handle such upgrades if needed? And was this considered as part of the EV infrastructure planning process? So he's just asking about potential extra electrical loads and what the plan is and how this affects them.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any plan that would measure or quantify the electrical future proofing of the building. We had enough to put in a whole new 600 amp subservice. There is still some excess capacity in the building. We have natural gas cooktops throughout the building, but we have 208 volt ovens. So I can't answer the question, do we have enough if everyone switched? My guess is maybe, I just don't know. We haven't assessed that. It was enough to assess the capacity of the existing system for the new circuits going in for EV charging. And I mentioned before that we had lots of options. One of the options that we faced was not just a 2-to-1 or 3-to-1 or 1-to-1 sharing, but also how many amps we wanted the new service to be. And we decided we'd spend a little more and get a 600 amp service, not 400, and save a little bit by going 3-to-1. So we thought we might try to build into the building a little excess capacity, a little excess amperage capacity at the time of the EV charging. And whether that will be enough for some future thing, I can't answer that.
Okay, that's a good coverage of that question. So thank you for that. And so the next question with the hand up is Ed. Ed, go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, I haven't heard any mention of this, but I wonder, and this is a general question, any thought about rooftop solar paneling to generate the electricity rather than having to boost the hydro infrastructure to handle that?
We didn't look at that, Ed, so I don't know whether it would have produced enough. I suppose we could ask our contractor, but we didn't look at that, so I really can't offer an answer.
Okay, very good. Yeah, given that you didn't have to bring in extra power, it'd probably be an extra expense. Whereas if somebody was looking at needing a new transformer, that might be a way around it. Yeah. Okay, and next up is Stuart.
Question was actually for John about the carbon pricing he did in his calculation for the low carbon fuel standard. But I thought maybe somebody else in this room might know how can a person figure that out in BC, where that pricing is and that kind of information. Anybody know?
Yeah, John, do you want to answer that?
It's on the website. It's on the government website, the Low Carbon Fuel Standard website. They've got a test, an example of the calculation, so that you know if you know how many kilowatt hours you might use in a year, you can work out how many dollars you might get back.
Thanks, Robbie.
My understanding is that you have to trade those carbon credits, so it's not a fixed price. Is that not correct?
Yeah, that's right. It was using around the whatever $400 or something.
Right. So there is a kind of a bit of a baseline established from trading. Yeah. Okay. So next up is Lawrence.
Yeah, sorry, I got a helicopter going over. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah. Stay put while you ask your question, though, so you don't go out of range.
So the question is, my understanding is that up there, you actually get more in carbon credits than you spend in the electricity. And so I'm wondering, when you're wiring up a strata, is there ever talk about having the people who are using that electricity basically get the carbon credits or the value of the carbon credits when they're traded to help them pay, recover the amount of money they put in to the charging infrastructure they paid for? It doesn't seem fair that the whole strata should get the carbon credits when it's due to the people who sunk a bunch of money in to the chargers and then spend the money to have a car to charge from it.
Okay, let's let Tom talk to that.
Well, I'll let John talk to it as well, but the benefits of the carbon credit flowing to the strata would be premised on the idea that it was the strata's effort, that is everyone's effort, to put in the infrastructure that allowed someone to charge. So while I'm not suggesting that would give them, the unsullied claim to 100% of the carbon credit benefits, it would surely entitle them to some portion, because if all of the owners hadn't voted to spend that money, there wouldn't be carbon credits from that building. As for exactly who gets how much, I honestly, because we've just come into this recently, I don't know how that would be determined, so I can't speak to that. Maybe John can.
I think that the reason that the strata can get the benefit is that the extension of the carbon credit was given to the provider of the hydro, and stratas were for the first time recognized as providers of hydro for their tenants. And therefore, because they provide the hydro to the garage, the strata is the one that gets the benefit of the carbon credits.
Okay.
That's how I understand it too. I think John's left, so we won't have him talk about it, but that's how I understand it too. An individual user like myself who has an EV charger in my home cannot apply for that credit. It has to be a kind of a corporate thing, and a strata qualifies, but the individuals don't qualify. So it would be kind of difficult to, but as Tom said, everybody, even those who don't have a car, have paid this levy. And so I think it's a communal thing that the money comes communally. It looks good to me, but okay.
Okay,
now,
I didn't understand. Let me just follow up. So I didn't understand that it was the whole strata that paid, because when John's described scenarios, I had the impression that the people who were getting the chargers were paying for the whole upgrade and not the strata. I'm wondering, in the case where that is the case, where only the people who are getting chargers are paying for the entire infrastructure, and does it seem fair that they should get the carbon credits and strata should kick them back to them?
Well, in our case, that's not how it works, because everyone does have to pay into the infrastructure. So there isn't a loading up of the charges on just those who get chargers. Maybe in some buildings there are, Lawrence, but not in ours. The whole strata is putting in the infrastructure. So it would make some sense that the whole strata gets at least the bulk of the benefit of any carbon credits.
Oh, I totally agree with you.
okay, Donovan, I see you've raised your hand this time. Do you want to ask a question yourself?
Yeah, sure. Thanks so much. I just want to sort of back up to the question that came up earlier about, considering solar in a MURB site. And I think it's a really interesting question. And I think it's also quite possible we'll hear, more of this moving forward. So, but what I wanted to say is it's, there's a number of complications there. My experience in this is more like solar, which I have, in a residential setting. So these are the comments I'm going to make are, kind of general, because specifics matter, and the details about the electrical system are going to matter, and the electrical system, in terms of what I was asking earlier about, people may be wanting to move off fossil fuels for their cooking. I don't know I didn't ask about the building electric system, for hot water. How is that produced? Is it from natural gas? But, as we move forward, there's going to be more interest and drive to move away from fossil fuels for these things, not just for EVs, but for these building things. And it also relates to, how new buildings are designed. But back to the solar, assuming the electric system can handle it without some major upgrade, it's an interesting question, but it's a bit separate. So what we need to keep in mind is that solar, for these type of things, is going to be, we're talking really a grid tied thing. So the solar is going to be producing energy real time. So how the EV benefits from that directly, it's not really necessarily benefiting directly, because it depends on when people are charging. But the thing is, with the net metering program, any energy that's produced, if it's going back to the grid, it's credited as energy. So there is a payback on EV, on solar, and so it is something that could be considered, and it could be, one could decide that there's a positive payback and worth considering. And I know that recently there's, I just saw a thing in the last week, a presentation about a new step code 4 build in, I think, Kelowna, West Kelowna, that was done in the last year or so. So step code 4 is the highest step code level, getting close to pass the house performance. They put solar on it. So presumably the cost benefit looked good, so they did it. The other thing to mention is if it's a question of, does the electrical system can handle the EV charging, the only way the solar is going to help there is if you have batteries installed as well. And again, this all comes down to the costs and returns. At some point, it may make sense to be doing things like that, adding battery storage, because that could also give you resilience, in case of a major grid outage and other things. So these are all things I'm sure we're going to hear or see more about. Yeah. Hope that made sense.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Good. Thank you. Do you want to comment on that, Tom? I know it's a bit off topic from your project, the solar.
A little bit, only the observation that if it made sense to implement a kind of solar generation for EV, it would also perhaps make sense to install it if you didn't have EV, but we have a fairly big hydro bill here for the building anyway. It's running the elevators and everything else. So I could see at some point we would want to investigate putting solar in. We have quite a big flat roof on the building. It could be a good candidate for it. I'm just not sure it would be tied directly to EV charging, but it's a heck of an idea.
Yeah, so Tom, that's exactly, that's exactly how you should look at it. Yeah. So there could be a case for it, and it could be something, worth looking at and considering down the line type of thing. But if there's one of the things about it is within the life cycle of, you got to be, in this case, also considering the condition of your roof, and, does it need to be re-roofed anytime soon? Better to put it on a new roof, but yeah, one can develop a business case and see, what that case is.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's all the questions we have up. So I'm just going to open it up to general conversation. I don't know if we want to stop the recording, but does anyone want to make any kind of comment, even if it's not a question at this time, about the presentation? Other than I'll just say, as we're kind of closing up here, say thank you very much, Tom. That was very well organized and I think very helpful to most everybody here.
You're welcome.
I'm glad we've got it recorded. Yeah,